Okay, I did this recording yesterday, and then when I reviewed it, I found that you couldn't really see the stuff at the bottom of the form right. I didn't realize that was how the camera's going to work, so I'm going to run through it all real quick again today. This is how you use the law to determine what form is required by law to satisfy the requirements in the law regarding the reporting of income under Section 1, tax imposed, the federal personal income tax. Right? I mean, how do you use the law to find out what information return form is required by any given law? This was something that was very difficult to do until 1980 when they passed the Paperwork Reduction Act, which was enacted in order to stop the government from continuing to collect tons of information that it didn't need to maintain and wasn't able to do so efficiently. So they passed the law, the Paperwork Reduction Act, and every government agency under the act had to compile a cross-referenced table showing the statutes that they were in charge of enforcing, cross-linked to all the information collection requests, i.e. the forms that the agency used to collect information to keep things in compliance with the law. And OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, took all of this information, went through the law, and made sure that none of the forms asked for information or tried to require information that the law didn't require, so that the minimal amount of information to satisfy the law would be collected and no more, to reduce the amount of paperwork that they were having to maintain. So all the government agencies had to submit this list. It took the IRS 5 years to comply, and when they did, it ended up in the law right here. Title 26, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 602, Section 602.101. You can look this up in any law library. And in this table, in the law, incorporated in the law, the regulations implementing the statute, you can go and look up what statutes require what returns. So I said, well, to the government, how do you use the law to determine what form is required? And basically, they wouldn't answer. But we know how they know. It's because they send it to the post office. They put 75 million forms in the post office every year for the American people, and that means you have to go and get it and use it, right? Doesn't have anything to do with the law, just what everybody does. It's the de facto thing, apparently. So I thought it would be interesting to investigate whether or not you could actually use the law to make that determination accurately. And it turns out you can. So here's the table, Part 602. This upper paragraph describes that the purpose of the Paperwork Reduction Act was to come into compliance with the new law and make sure the government doesn't collect more than it needs to. So I'm going to roll it up off of the screen because that's what messed up yesterday's video, and bring up to the top the rest of the form. Here's the table. In the table right here, on the left side, you have the statutes, and you can see right here, this first one, Section 1, designated here in the table as 1.1-1. That stands for, it's all in Title 26. That stands for Part 1, Chapter 1, Section 1, 1.1-1. Then over here on the right side is the OMB document control number that was assigned to the form that OMB approved that the IRS submitted and said, here's the form that's required, and this is the OMB document control number that the OMB office assigned to the IRS form required by the code section that imposes the tax. Now you can see here that for Section 1, there's only one form listed. You notice down here at 126, there's more than one form. So if there is more than one form required, it's shown right here in the table. This section has more shown, Section 1 does not, just the one. And the OMB document control number assigned to the form required by law from American citizens on April 15th in order to satisfy the requirements that law imposed and created by Section 1, tax imposed, the tax section imposing the federal personal income tax. That form will bear OMB document control number 1545-0067. Can we zoom in on this? Oh, look, we can. Here you go. I hope that didn't jump off the screen. I don't think it did. 1545-0067. There it is. Okay? So that OMB document control number must be the OMB document control number that's on a Form 1040, right? Because that's what everyone thinks is required by law. So here we go, down to Form 1040. Now this is from 30 years ago, 1993. I'll show you a more recent one in a minute, but here's the OMB document control number, 1545-0074. And as we can all see, that matches up completely with 0067. Doesn't match. What's happened? What's going on? You mean Form 1040 isn't actually the form you're required by law to file under the section that imposes the income tax? What's going on? What is the correct form? Oh, look. Here it is, OMB document control number 1545-0067. That's what matches the number up here, 0067. But it's on Form 2555 entitled Foreign Earned Income. Foreign Earned Income. And what's it say right here? For use by U.S. citizens and resident aliens only. Holy smoke. You mean the only form I'm required to file by law is not Form 1040, but Form 2555, reporting only my foreign earned income? I think I've been lied to and deceived and robbed. What's going on? What's going on is you're being lied to, robbed, and deceived. When this information, published in the law in 1986, began to be used in jury trials in the 90s, it defeated the Department of Justice and the IRS claims. It proved to jury members that Form 1040 wasn't required and that the person on trial couldn't be guilty of failing to pay a return that wasn't required to be filed or made. So this specific information in the law proving the income tax was never imposed on domestic income reported on a Form 1040. It was only imposed on foreign earned income earned in a territory, possession, or a foreign country under a tax treaty. It's not the form to pay. 1040 isn't the form to use. 2555 is the form. But like I say, when this information was presented to juries in the 1990s and began to defeat the federal government in court, the IRS decided they couldn't have it in the law anymore. So they removed this entry, 1545-0067. They removed it from the table. And now when you look up in the law in this table, 26 CFR, Part 602, Section 602.101, you find that under Section 1, no form at all is required. No form at all is required. But they didn't change the law. They just hid the requirement from you. So now it's impossible to use the law to determine what form is required from Section 1. Not only did they remove the entry from the law, but they then changed the OMB document control number on the Form 2555 to be the same OMB document control number that's on the Form 1040. So now they broke their own rules, which require a different ID number be assigned to every form so that each can be tracked to the specific statute it's responsible for. By putting the same number on the same forms, they've made it impossible to discern which of them is actually required. It makes it impossible to determine if one or two are required. And then instead of listing multiple forms under the OMB, separate OMB, they just say, oh no, two are under the same number. What a bunch of lying frauds. This is as intentional an attempt at deceiving the American people as you could come up with. This is intentional fraud. Now, of course, it's still not listed, so they can't argue it's required, even though it's the same number on both returns. And I've been waiting for 24 years now for the next shoe to drop, which of course is when they put back in the table a requirement that will then be 0074 instead of 67. But that will just be the IRS changing the law that Congress didn't change, because technically you can't change this without Congress changing the law. It was illegal for them to remove the entry, and it will be illegal for them to put it back when they try to do so under 0074. This is criminal fraud being perpetrated from within the offices of the IRS and the Treasury, the United States government. Criminal fraud, conspiracy to defraud the American people and enslave them, because none of the money collected under this goes in the Treasury as required by law of all collected taxes. It's all rerouted criminally to the Federal Reserve Bank, a private corporation, which is the beneficiary of all your tax dollars. Alleged tax dollars. It's not tax at all. It's peonage debt service. All of this money allegedly under income tax is routed to the private corporate Federal Reserve Bank to collateralize the $34 trillion. And as long as the American people continue to allow their labor to be collateralized in this manner, the bankers will continue lending trillions of dollars to bankrupt America. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation. They're running it out. They're running it out. They're printing the dollar into oblivion. And it's all collateralized in this debt service program. None of the money is tax that goes to the Treasury for the government to spend as required of all collected taxes under law by Title 26, Section 7809. It's all being criminally redirected to the Federal Reserve Bank to the benefit of the private corporation to control and run America. The revenues are not there in the Treasury for the government to draw on. They're not there for Congress to write appropriations against. Access to this capital is being denied them by the Federal Reserve Bank having the dollars. That means that when a disaster happens, Congress can't run to the Treasury and draw on the tax revenues that have been accumulating all year. Instead of being able to take $1 billion out to take the hurricane or flood or earthquake victims in the area hit, they can't tap the revenues because they're not there. They have to, surprise, borrow more money from the Federal Reserve Bank to address the disaster. It's not a system of taxation. It's a system of criminal debt service by peonage. It's the 11th century peonage plantation system, not one of taxation, certainly not one of constitutional taxation. Okay, I told you I'd show you another version, Form 2555. Here we are, 1993, for use by citizens and residents only. This is the whole form. You can see the OMB document control number in 93 was 0067. That's the number that matches the requirements shown in the law for Section 1 tax imposed. Here's a more recent Form 1040 from last year, 2023, OMB document control number 1545-0074. So it's still got the wrong number that doesn't match what was in the table. And this evidence can be used to show a jury, here's what the law was. Congress never changed it. IRS did, to hide the truth of the law from you. They didn't change the law, they just hid the requirement. But you can see what the requirement was, and you can know that in the interim, Congress never changed the law, except for the one change they made under Donald Trump, which didn't change the nature of the law, just the brackets and thresholds and deductions associated with it. Now, is there any other evidence maybe that we could find to support the contention that Form 1040 isn't actually a required return to satisfy the requirements of law created by Section 1 tax imposed, the federal personal income tax? Oh, well, look, here's an interesting piece of paper. It's from the National Archives to a Mr. Durack And they reply in response to his inquiry. You have asked whether Internal Revenue Service provisions codified at 26, 6020, 6201, 6203, 6301. 6020 is the substitute for return statute. 6201, 6203 are the assessment statutes. 6301, 6303 are the notice statute. 6321 is the lien statute. 6331 through 43 are the levy statutes. And these others are enforcement statutes. So he's asking whether or not, codified at 26, have been processed or included in 26 CFR Part 1. And he says that the implementing regulations for the section cited above have been published in various parts of Title 27, not Title 26. Title 27 is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So apparently none of these code sections controlling any of those events that I ran through are implemented for enforcement use with the income tax. Only alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That, of course, would be a legitimate Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, power to tax by excise. And they're all applicable to and made enforceable under Title 27, but not Title 26. What else do they say? Oh, look down here. Our records indicate that the Internal Revenue Service has not incorporated by reference in the Federal Register, as that term is defined in the Federal Register system, a requirement to make an income tax return. The American people have never been given notice of the law, of any law that says you have to file a federal income tax return. You can't be required to do something that the government hasn't given you notice of the federal law requiring such act. Never been published. Requirement for the form that is required in the law, Form 2555, isn't recorded in the law as being owed or due. The whole system is a fraud. A complete and total fraud, designed not to raise tax revenue for the federal government to have to operate, but rather to criminally and fraudulently enslave the American people under a system of debt service that has them laboring not for the benefit of America or the nation or their children or our future or our infrastructure or our social support systems, but for the enrichment and the benefit and the power of the private corporate bank known as the Federal Reserve Bank, the money lenders. Remember? What did Jesus do to the money lenders in the temple? Is it time for us to upset the tables too? Maybe if April 15th drained the Treasury instead of filling it, Congress would react to these crimes and do something about it. Maybe what we should do as the American people is everyone whose bottom line indicates that they owe tax, instead of filing a Form 1040 on April 15th, file for the automatic extension. The only people who should file on April 15th are those people who are due a refund. Thus, by using the law, we can hoist them on their own petard and use April 15th as a mechanism to drain the Treasury of revenues rather than to fill it, as no revenues will be forthcoming until the extension comes due in September or later. I would suggest that now, with this particular administration, it's particularly important to deny them further revenues, because they're using the money to orchestrate an illegal invasion of foreigners who are being registered to vote to steal the political power and the congressional representation and the electoral votes away from the American people and place them in the hands of the foreigners being placed in the Democrat blue cities and states to replace the American citizens, leaving those high tax, high crime, high regulation, anti business, anti energy, anti American policies being implemented by what now can only be described as a Democrat Party gone mad. So, what will it be? Shall we return to a constitutional system in America? Or will we continue to allow them to lie to, deceive, defraud, and enslave the entire American people until there is no wealth or productivity left in the nation, just like what happened to Venezuela, Cuba, Soviet Russia, Communist China, North Korea, Iran? Do we really need to run through the list of all the failed socialist governments in history? Because they all failed. Socialism doesn't produce anything. It consumes and destroys. And when all the wealth in the country is destroyed, it goes to war against their neighbors to co-opt that wealth as well. So, America, you're going to have to decide. What's it going to be? Freedom under the Constitution or enslavement under the second plank of the Communist Manifesto? Because that's where income tax is found. The second plank of the Communist Manifesto reads a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find graduated taxation. Divide the people into classes and attack them, attack them, attack them. Keep them at warfare with one another so they never notice. It's the political class that's looting the treasury and enslaving them.